focus on disruptive technologies and its imminent threat to consumers, along with rising political turmoil and rapidly changing social orders, have created a growing sense of economic uncertainty, causing a pressure on globalization. If companies are to survive these turbulent times, then it's essential that they adopt a more sophisticated human resource function that can contribute to sustainable performance. To introduce the next panel, I would like to call on stage one of our favorites at NTLF and to moderate the session, Shireen Ban, Managing Director, CNBC TV 18.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for being such a spectacular audience, and we have a full house here. I don't know why NASSCOM keeps calling me, because clearly technology hasn't evaded my life as much as one would imagine it would have over the last, I think, 15 years that I've been coming here to NASSCOM. I still have an old BlackBerry that I use, but they still keep calling me, so thank you very much to everybody here at NASSCOM. We've got a very exciting session coming up for you. Please keep your questions coming in. I'm going to try and make this as interactive as possible. And I have a very important announcement to make. Praveen had said that you should watch out for the ultimate battlefield that's coming up for you later this evening, but I promise you the ultimate battlefield starts now, because I have with me three of India's tech titans, so to speak, and may I call them here to join me on stage. Rajesh Gopinathan of TCS. Rajesh, can we have you up on stage? Also with us, Salil Parekh of Infosys. Salil, thanks very much for joining us. And to close the trio, Rishad Premji of Wipro. Rishad, can we have you up on stage, please? And before we start, if we can, I don't know if our mics are working. Yeah, if you can get some water here for the panel before we start as well. Ladies and gentlemen, this is also being televised across CNBC TV 18. So you can catch our tweets and you can catch our live coverage on air if you're not here physically present at NASSCOM. As I pointed out, this is the ultimate battlefield in many ways. We're all friends, says Rishad Premji. I'll believe you till I see you go out there in the coming quarter for the next deal and the next client that you're chasing after. Just to put how important this is into context, a combined market capitalization for the three of them of over 12 lakh crore rupees. The number of employees that they currently have between the three of them is 864,454 at last count. Big deal wins. Just in the third quarter, 1.8 billion for Infosys, 6 billion for TCS. Rishad, what's your number? Why don't you share that number? Okay, we'll have to listen to the analyst call. All right, so let's get things started. What we're here to talk about is turbulent times, technology and talent, and how these three leaders are navigating their individual companies through these turbulent times, but also where we are going to see the Indian IT services industry over the next decade. I'm not just going to focus on individual companies, but I want to talk to them about where they see the landscape for the industry. Rajesh, let me start by asking you, and you know, I've had the privilege of discussing this with the three of them individually, but this is the first time that the three of them are together on a single platform, so I think it's going to be a lot more enriching and hopefully much more provocative. Rajesh, I'm going to put that question to you. We've seen many changes for the Indian IT services sector in the past decade. Tremendous growth, but now down to single digits. Margins which are almost at 30%, now down to between 20 to 25%. Deal wins continue to come in, digital revenues for each of you growing, and now about 40 to 50% of your revenues. What will be the next decade for the Indian IT services business?
The next decade is going to be about continuing to transform ourselves. We have had a tremendous journey over the last 20 years. Many of the stalwarts are here. We acknowledge the 20 years of participation of NASSCOM here. And if you look at it, what we have done is we have built up an enviable talent pool in this country. If you think back over a century kind of basis, what industrialization did to Europe, technology is doing that to India. And the same role that Europe had in industrialization from a global perspective, India is at the cusp of making that kind of an impact to the world as we look at the next decade, which Praveen so nicely put as the tech decade. So we are in a phenomenal position today compared to where we were when we started this century. And it's up to us to reimagine where we can use this talent and this opportunity to drive the next 10 years.
We'll get to reimagining in just a second, but I just want to build on the point that you made that the journey has evolved from the cost arbitrage journey for the Indian IT services business to much more value add, end to end. And those are the things that the three of you go and pitch to clients. The transformational deals, that is what you're focusing on. So let's start by talking about where we are today, what the big shift has been in the past decade before we talk about how we reimagine the services industry going forward.
So the biggest shift has been that if you were to think about the big technology changes that happened over the last couple of decades, we were always on a catch-up mode. The start of the technology wave was typically much earlier before we brought up to it. Whereas over the last few years, if you take the elements of what we call as digital transformation, and even more so when we're coming at automation, we are the originators of this change. We are at the starting point of that.
So we're no longer playing catch-up. That's an important headline that you're giving us. The Indian IT services industry is no longer playing catch-up.
Absolutely not.
Okay. Salil, do you agree?
Absolutely. I think we are at a stage where globally technologies become so relevant, and the critical mass that collectively India has, all of the companies here have, is just driving this change. So we are absolutely at the forefront of the change. And the good news really is there's so much new that's going on in what people are calling digital transformation, that's driving all of the change that we are putting in place. So really it's a hugely positive, optimistic view of the next 10 years.
Optimistic, yes, but to build on Rajesh's point that if we're no longer playing catch up and if the Indian IT services industry is actually the origin and the driver of new innovation and new change, give me an example of what we've seen happen.
So one of the things that we start to see is in this area of cloud. There are a lot of players who build cloud ecosystems, but the way we have started to build within India with different companies, the way to switch between clouds, the way to create cloud-independent growth scenarios, that's quite innovative. And each of the companies here, many of the companies in the audience are doing that today. And we are seeing clients.
Who's most innovative of each of the companies sitting here?
Frankly, these are the most innovative companies, so it's a privilege to be with them in any case. But we see that across all of our client base. And we see that there's a huge amount of respect that clients have for that level of innovation that many of these companies bring to those clients.
Okay, Rishad, build on that. Yeah, yes, please.
Can I challenge the question in itself?
Please.
Because I think we've got to break this idea of Indian companies versus global companies.
Yeah.
The reality is some of the global companies today have more people in India than some of us have here. True. Right? So the concept is not about whether you're global or Indian. The reality is we're all multinational companies.
Right.
The Indian companies began with Indian heritage, so they tend to have more Indian talent than some of the global companies. So I think that philosophy has completely changed. The other thing that's changed, it's not only technology companies that have a presence here. It's actually customers and then enterprises we were talking about earlier. You know, I was talking with a customer earlier who's a large global bank. And they have more people here. They're building a talent base here, not for cost and quality, but for strategic differentiation. So they would tell you, don't walk our corridors of London and New York to get business. Walk our corridors of Hyderabad and Chennai and Mumbai and Pune. Right? So the philosophy has changed dramatically. So I would not pile Indian companies and global companies separately because we're all leveraging a very similar talent base, which is a very, very powerful and qualified talent base.
I'm glad that you brought that point up, and I'll address talent in just a second. But Rishad, you know, to build on what you just said, and you're absolutely right, it's not just the Microsofts and the Ciscos who are setting up R&D centers here in India. So the back office story is long gone, or at least that's behind us. But you're right about how India is sort of becoming the innovation hub for manufacturing companies as well. You know, patents are being filed out of India. I think IBM filed about 900 patents in the last quarter out of India or something like that, if my memory serves me right. What do you believe is going to be this IP innovation-driven model, and how do you see companies like yours benefiting from it going forward?
So I think two things are happening, right? One is you have young companies that are becoming true product companies coming out of India. And it's still early days, but I think that's happening. And that's the challenge we keep getting, which is, you know, is India truly becoming a innovation hub if we don't really have world-class companies coming out of India, which I think is changing. I can speak for Wipro. Our philosophy is more how do we leverage product and services in a combined manner. Unlikely that we will become a product company or have large-scale IP that we sell independently, but how do we combine product and services to take productized services or business process as a service? That's the journey we are on, but the journeys could be different for different stakeholders.
Productization of services, and I know I'm getting a lot of tweets on my Twitter timeline asking me about whether that is going to be part of the evolution as far as your businesses are concerned. And this is something that we have discussed, but tell me, lay out a roadmap for us on what this is actually going to mean.
Absolutely. So, for example, we have filed now more than 5,000 patents, been granted more than about 1,000. The fundamental belief is that when you think about IPR, and I'll come to productization, we have the intellect. We didn't have the discipline and the capability of converting that intellect into property and then to exploit that as a productized right. And that's the journey that we are on. It requires us to go through this in a systematic way.
So where are we in that journey?
We are
where would
definitely in the form of actually capturing our intellect and converting that into an asset. I think collectively, if you were to think about Indian companies, we have not yet mastered the art of productizing that and exploiting it. But that is just a capability, and that will come through.
You're saying that's just a capability, it'll come through, but what's holding it back? When will we actually see this asset monetization, if I can call it that?
One step at a time. It's,
5 years, 10 years, do you believe that it's going to happen within this decade?
Absolutely. I would say, I would definitely put it well below, before 10 years. In fact, all of us here, we have had phenomenal success in productizing the automation side capabilities. All of us have had very good success productizing on the domain side. In fact, the top 3 banking and financial services software all over the world belongs to one of the 3 of us. So we are not just talking about local products, we are talking about global dominance in specific niches. It is becoming broad-based. There are many here in the audience, I'm sure, who are creating the niches in much more technology-focused areas, some in domain-focused areas. So the groundswell of productization that is happening in the country, combined with the talent and the fact that we have such a good visibility into the value creation across multiple industries, I believe that we are in a beautiful position to actually push this forward and unleash the full potential of what we have here.
When do you believe we'll unleash the full potential, Salil, and what do you believe could hold us back from unleashing the full potential?
I think the discussion we were just having, just to add to it and then come to the question, I think there's a view on products which we just discussed. There's a view on platforms. And platforms are where we see, again, with the people representing the companies here, but also in the audience, a tremendous amount of success. So you can see platforms today, for example, on mortgages. You can see platforms on insurance. These are the platforms that give you scale and that give you tremendous benefit to growth. Then you have automation stories, which are different ways of productizing. Then you have stories which are around what we call things like bot factories. These things make automated development also more and more feasible. So there are many different ways that companies in India, and this is, as Rashad pointed out, not just companies of Indian origin, but operating from India, who have tremendous ability to drive this. In terms of what can stop us, frankly, my view is, I don't see anything that is going to stop us.
We're unstoppable.
Because if you look at it at a scale of global scale, tech is a prevalent theme everywhere. So you have, let's say a manufacturing company in a small manufacturing town in the Western world calling themselves a tech company now. Here we are the tech center of the world. There's no technology which is developed which we within India don't have leading view on. So I don't, if you just put those 2 themes together, we have a one-way ticket to growth.
One-way ticket to growth. Rishad, Premji, and we ask you, all 3 of you, this every quarter. What happens to the legacy business, and what is the bet that you're making on the digital side, which of course is going to be the bet on the future? And there are always concerns on the judicious mix between defending the past and attacking the future. How much of a challenge is that for you?
No, I think, look, all organizations are morphing and changing. What was relevant 5 years ago is less relevant today. had everything in data centers, you're moving a large chunk to the cloud, you're moving them to public clouds, you're moving them to hybrid clouds, to private clouds. So the reality is the nature of work is changing, and I think you've got to keep up with the times, and what was relevant to serve your customers 5 years ago is not relevant to serve your customers today anymore. And you have to be open to the mindset of allowing some business to go from the past to be able to capture some of the new business that is the future. And, you know, to use the word cannibalization, you have to be able to cannibalize yourself, because if you don't, some of your competition will. That's exactly the propositions customers will, your competition will take to customers. And you have to have that openness. And I acknowledge that it's not easy. It's not easy in a public limited company that reports results quarter to quarter. But you've also got to be strategic about this, because if you're not going to do it, you're going to be taken away anyways by somebody else. So you might as well do it to yourself.
Okay.
So I'm of that view.
So what are you currently in the process of cannibalizing or disrupting within the organization for yourself?
No, but
before
I'll just-
Rajesh or Salil force you to do
I'll just give you a very
it.
simple example. You may have 300 people working on a particular transaction operations process, and you're working with people, and you can significantly automate that process by leveraging intelligent bots. You're going to do that, and it may change the profile of the way you command pricing for it, but if you don't do it, somebody else will. That's why I also believe, going forward, Shireen, that the nature of commercial models may change. Historically, we've charged in some form of people, whether it be fixed price projects, whether it be capacity, whether it be time and material. Maybe you'll move to a model where you charge for people and bots, as an example, right? And that can be a commercial model that can perhaps evolve over time. So things will change.
Things will change. Do you believe, as Rishad mentioned, that the commercial model is also likely to change as we see more and more of this shift towards automation, which is already showing up efficiency gains, for each one of you?
I think the commercial models have been constantly changing, and they'll continue to change. So if you even look at our own business, a percentage of the business now comes out of transactions. And the idea is that you take a larger and larger chunk of the value chain, and you take on responsibility for delivering that value. And that is phenomenally exciting, because, and this is not, it started earlier on transaction processing. Now it is shifting more and more into other domains. And as we get a larger chunk of the value chain, the amount of value addition that we can put on to that also keeps on increasing. We've been traditionally addressing, I believe, in the range of about 3% of the total value addition capacity in most industries. The opportunity is to take it up to 20 to 30%.
But I want an honest answer from each one of you. As leaders, you have to look into the future, and you've got to sort of strategically place bets about what is going to work for you, what you're going to be able to capitalize on 5 years, 10 years down the line, because that's your job as the leaders. You've got to find the future in the current. But you still have to deliver on your quarterly numbers. How do you deal with that, and what is the biggest problem that you face with the kind of expectation management that you have to deal with, especially doing this quarter after quarter?
I think
or is too much made out of it?
Let's think about multiple stakeholders here. So there is the customer set, there is the employee set, there are the investors, and then there is, of course, the media. I think the problem is more on the right-hand side rather than on the left-hand side.
It's us, is it? Salil, are we the problem?
I would not say you are the problem, Shireen. Yes. I think you're very much part of the solution.
Thank you.
I think, the way I would look at it is, if you work to see where your clients are going and make sure those expectations, and you try to build relevance to them, all the other things sort of follow through. And of course, there is intensity, but it's in any, I would say, listed enterprise, any enterprise which is trying to do something. And there's fortunately a way to drive that, because these are, at the end, hugely profitable, growing businesses.
Yeah.
So there's an expectation that different stakeholders have. But if you remain relevant to your clients and you make sure that your employees are seeing the change in the reskilling, you usually are okay.
But Shireen, let me just challenge again.
Yeah.
Because
Are you
are you
also being nice to me or not being nice to me?
It's dangerous not to be nice to you, Shireen, though. No, I'm kidding. No, I think we're not an industry going through a time of, where we're saying to people, hey, give us a stopgap, right? Because things have to sort of readjust from disruption and then come back. That's not the conversation any of us are having. So I think I struggle with that question a little bit. The other is, I think most stakeholders are quite smart. So if you start with investors, investors understand. Investors understand that, hey, look, if I need to be making investments in the short term, and this is how you measure me in terms of input metrics that you see and output metrics that they see, people understand. I mean, if you're investing in a product business, you're not going to see returns for a long time before you invest in the product. So I think you can talk to stakeholders, whether they be investors, whether they be customers, whether they be internal stakeholders, and be able to explain a roadmap that you need to take. But I think it's important to underscore that this is not an industry going through a phase where there's going to be complete disruption and a pause before we come back as an industry.
Sure. But since you talked about investors, and I want to ask the three of you, what we have seen, for instance, in the US, is a lot of activist shareholders, and they have, in a sense, called the shots as far as tech companies are concerned, other companies also, but in tech companies specifically. Is that a concern? Could that blindside you, or is it not relevant in the Indian context?
You know, I don't know. We haven't seen it in India so much so far. Is it possible? It certainly is. You know, frankly, we don't worry about it so much, just given that we have a strong promoter ownership in the company that allows us to be, at some level, protected from that kind of challenge. But it's certainly something that one has to be cautious of and think about as one is making decisions.
Rajesh?
Oh, we have a very activist chairman.
Salil?
I think if you know, the view we have is, if there's inefficiency in the business, there'll be someone, whether it's activists or someone, will want to, you know, have a view on it and try to get you to make some changes. So in that sense, if you're constantly paranoid yourself and making those changes, then you're usually okay.
You know, I want to talk to the three of you about the M&A route for over the next decade and what that is actually going to be able to be used for. Richard, I'll start by asking you, because I would imagine that of the three, you have been the most aggressive. You've got the string of pearls acquisition strategy that's been in place now for many years. You do them small, but you've been doing them consistently. Is that going to continue to be the strategy? What is going to drive M&A? Size clearly doesn't seem to be the factor. It seems to be more capability and plugging niches. What will drive M&A for you?
I mean, you should ask. Salah just bought a company yesterday.
I know, just 48 hours ago. I'll get to him as well.
But you know, personally, I'm a huge believer in M&A. I think it's a very powerful medium and way to very visibly communicate that you are serious about investing, to very quickly acquire new capabilities. So I'm a big believer in M&A. We've done a fair number over the last few years. We've done less so over the last 18 months. But I think we will continue
Why
to
is
leverage.
that?
No, it's just the fact that these M&A is binary, right? You buy some things work out, some things don't work out. But as a tool, we believe in it very strongly. I think you've got to be very careful about not getting carried away and going overboard, and how you integrate new capabilities, how do you make them work within your system, I think is very, very critical. So you've got to find the right balance and not go completely berserk. I think it's also important that we don't look at M&A as a tool for acceleration of growth. We look at it as a tool for acceleration of capability. And so different organizations use that tool differently as well. We're very clear that we are in the capability bucket as opposed to the growth acceleration bucket.
Okay, what capabilities do you believe you will continue to need to plug by way of the M&A route?
No, I think you will continue to look at capabilities around new age cloud capabilities. You know, how do you significantly enhance digital capabilities around strategic design, for example? How do you open up new geographies which are still small and you want to be more relevant and scaled in those kinds of markets? So things like that.
Salil, you've just done one. You closed it, 48 hours ago. What is going to drive M&A for you? What's going to be the rationale as we move forward in the next decade?
So in M&A, really, it's a tool which can be hugely positive. There are always challenges where, finding the right cultural fit, finding the right integration. We're assuming that you get by those over time. We've done 3 types of acquisitions in the last 2 years. One is in the cloud area. We've done 2 companies there. One is in what we call experience, which is how all of us experience technology, and it's a new way of integrating digital studios in. And the third is in the platform, the discussion we had earlier, to scale out some new platform. So anything that helps us be more relevant to our clients, those are the areas we'll drive M&A in. Fortunately, all the companies here have a very strong balance sheet, huge cash generation. So we have the toolkit to do this. It's more a function of integration and cultural fit. Those are things you have to watch out for.
You've perhaps been the most sort of held back when it comes to M&A at TCS, Rajesh. Why is that?
Actually, we have been systematically investing. So if you look at it across all 3 dimensions, and like Salil and Rishad said, whether it is from a services perspective or products perspective or from new markets perspective, we have always systematically grown, especially on geographical expansion. M&A is our preferred route, whether it is Latin America, Europe, Japan. They've always gone M&A, joint ventures, systematic acquisitions. So it's not that we have not done it, but we are more measured. So we like to give it enough time for it to play out. Last time that we have done a big one has been when we did France and Japan, which is about 4 or 5 years back.
Yeah.
And typically we have been more, I would say the cadence has been lesser, but the size has been fairly large.
Yeah, the size has been large. You're right about that. Before I move to talent, I want to ask you about, since we're discussing turbulence, what are the headwinds that you face today? And I'll start by asking you, Rajesh, what would you say are the top 5 headwinds that you face today as an organization and as an industry? What would you be most concerned about?
I think the biggest part of it is the evolving landscape from an end customer perspective, because all these industries are going through a significant amount of change. Their expectations of technology and how technology can add value, as well as how they consume it, is constantly evolving. Our biggest consumers are banking, financial services, retail, etc. All of these are at the forefront of continuously reimagining themselves. So the turbulence is both an opportunity as well as a risk. It depends on where we land up on an individual situation. But I believe that, especially for services companies, periods of change are huge periods of opportunity. Actually, the change is a friend. We just need to make sure that we are riding the wave correctly and investing right.
Regulatory headwinds, how much of that is a challenge and a concern that you
Look at the
navigate
bulk of
through?
the regulatory focus that is currently on, especially when it comes to data privacy, etc. and all. I think we are well aligned to that. We are on the right side of it. We are more focused on what we do with the data than of ownership of the data per se. And technology today allows for that data to be locally resident wherever it needs to be. So we are quite agnostic to where the data is. Similarly, from a privacy perspective, our business models are very, very agnostic to many of the evolving concerns that are there on that. Similarly, on the security aspect. So I believe that we are on the right side of most of the big regulatory changes that are currently happening.
So that is not on your dashboard. It's not a red light that's flashing. The regulatory challenges are not a red light that's flashing on your dashboard. Not as of today. Rishad?
No, I would just add maybe 3, 4 things. Some of them can be more hard, some of them can be more soft in terms of trends and challenges. One is data and the explosion of data and how do you use it smartly, and especially with more and more, we've talked a lot about structured and unstructured data, more and more data on the edge with things and devices getting connected. The whole opportunity, the whole challenge of how do you leverage it smartly to drive differentiation as companies, and how do we as partners help our customers on that journey. So I think the next 10 years will be a huge opportunity for data leveraging to drive business impact. I think that's one. The second is the future of work. How does work happen? Where does work happen? And so it's a combination of future of work and future of talent. I'm a huge believer that over time, you'll have to access talent. You'll have to go to where talent is, as opposed to where talent is where you want the talent to be, because somebody will be sitting somewhere in the middle of nowhere in their pajamas and you want to be able to access them. And that's, I think, going to become a reality over the next 5 to 10 years. I think things like sustainability and how are you sustainable as an organization, these are some of the softer things, so they don't impact the business directly. It was a big conversation at Davos, but how sustainably conscious are you as an organization? What are you doing to contribute to saving and working beyond your business to working for the communities that you live and breathe in? And the fourth is diversity and inclusion. I think that's also going to become a big thing. It's becoming a bigger and bigger conversation in rooms. A lot of us as organizations have a large-scale body of balanced gender representation as an example, but at our leadership, perhaps it's not as strong. And how do we drive that? And I'm a huge believer.
Is there a commitment there to get more women onto the leadership roles?
I'm personally a big believer, Shireen. I'm not a believer in this as a metric. I've genuinely learned to believe over the last 12 months that it's truly impactful business to bring in diversity of mindset, and that comes from diversity of minds, it comes from diversity of gender, it comes from diversity of ethnicity, of social living, and you really have to bring those into conversations, and I think it makes for a more impactful business, but also customers are demanding that much more.
Okay, that's good to hear, but is there a commitment on how diverse your leadership positions will be in the next 5 years?
So I will not throw out a number, but I will tell you, for example, today we will not interview a single senior candidate without having a diverse candidate in that mix.
Okay, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Salil.
I think in terms of headwinds, the the main view for us is really the macroeconomic scenario. So far, the main markets, the GDP growth has been fairly strong, actually robust, and many of the sectors have been growing well. To me, if that holds up, I think we don't have too many there are other operational issues that we'll deal with ongoing, but otherwise, there's no other major headwind. Actually, we are fortunate to be in an industry which is a very positive industry.
Very positive industry, my God, you sound like, there's absolutely no problem that you're dealing with at all at this point in time, is it? It's a walk in the park.
It's not a walk, there's a lot of execution, there's a lot of operational work, but at a strategic level, how many places do you have where, companies are growing at this rate, producing so much cash, creating so much employment, and satisfying the clients? It's an unusually positive industry.
Since you brought up cash twice, let me ask the three of you, and I'll start by asking you, Salil. How do you see the capital allocation policy evolving? I mean, so far it's been buybacks, dividends, M&A. What do you believe could be the role and the prioritization of how you deploy capital over the next few years?
For us, it's fairly clear. It's in our allocation policy. I think we return cash to shareholders if we don't have anything sensible to do with it. We have some M&A, but in proportion to the cash that we are generating, is not that massive. If some opportunities show up over time, fortunately, all of us have the ability to do something. But for the most part, the policy is, we are returning cash to shareholders, and it's different depending on the path. There are buybacks or dividends, and there's always some decisions being made there.
Rajesh?
I think we have built up a fairly safe cash position, and incrementally over the last few years, as we have said, all our excess cash generation, unless there is some big M&A that comes about, is being distributed back to shareholders. We have been on this for the last 3 years and will continue to be.
Okay, let me talk about talent now. And Rishad, I'll start by asking you, what we've seen happen over the last few years is this decoupling of revenue and headcount for the industry as a whole. Chandra was talking about automation. You talked about going to where you find talent and somebody working out of their homes in a pajama. What is it going to mean as we see more automation, etc.? What is this industry going to see in terms of hiring, the kinds of people that you're going to hire, the kinds of skills that you're going to need, and where you are in that process of skilling people as well?
So let me talk about the industry first, Shireen, because I think the industry is doing a lot of, the industry is doing a lot of work in this, right? So there's a major initiative at NASSCOM, which I would argue is one of the flagship things that we're driving as NASSCOM, is the Future Skills program. And they have 3 components to it. One is the B2B. So in the first phase, how do you reskill 2 million of the 4 million people employed by the industry, which is a huge commitment. We already have 200,000 people active. We have over 100 companies active. And I think it becomes a great fundamental base by which you can get people assessed to a certain level at an industry standard, and then individual companies can build their differentiation on top of that, right? The focus is on 10 different technologies, on 155 different skills, and 70 different job roles. So the focus is around employability, as opposed to, hey, look, let's just get trained for the sake of getting trained. The other big focus is something called B2A, so business to academia. How do we work very smartly with institutions to significantly enhance the quality of teachers so they can produce better students? And we're working with 30 universities. And the third thing is something called Future Prime, which is really taking this to consumers more holistically and on a broad basis, which I think, again, is a phenomenal focus. And the government has invested tremendously in this because it gives everybody an opportunity to reskill and get skilled again. As a company, we're very focused on this. We have 3 different levels of skilling. All of us at some level run mini training universities, so to speak. We have an awareness level training in digital technologies where we're covering hundreds of thousands of people. We have what we call a knowledge level where we want people to have at least 2 digital skills and they can actually run projects, and we have tens of thousands of people there. And then we have an immersive level of training which is much more exhaustive, where people are really thought leaders in the different technologies. But I'm a big believer, so all of us will have to continue to invest in talent. I think the philosophy of training has moved from a push-based model to a pull-based model, that if you don't get retrained today, you will be irrelevant. And how do we provide opportunities for that? How do we also provide opportunities for people to actually work on projects where they can get skilled? So we actually run a crowdsourcing platform inside of the company where, hey, look, if Shireen is trained on Digital 101 or Data Science 101, she can actually work on a project inside of the company. So when she goes to an end customer, she can say, hey, look, not only am I trained, but I've also done this in real life experience. So I actually have some practicality to it as well.
So what is that going to mean then in terms of net hiring? And what is it also going to mean in terms of incremental investments? Because as you said, you're pretty much, and you have been running virtual universities within your organizations. But as you get ready for the future of work, the future of jobs, what is it going to mean in terms of
I think investments will continue, and all of us are investing on scale on this. Look, I think it's important, and we're all hiring as well. You know, we've just released a report, which I'm sure is coming out in a few minutes or has already come out. The industry added 205,000 net jobs directly this year, right? If you look at the 1:3 ratio in terms of surround jobs, the industry added about 800,000 jobs in total. So we're still a net hirer of people despite everything that we talk about. So I think we've got to qualify that. We've got to sort of get not too lost in the sensationalism of jobs disappearing and jobs going away, because the linearity may have broken, but we're still adding significant jobs to the industry.
Rajesh?
Most of what Rishad said is very true. But we need to see this in perspective. I think there was a lot of fear earlier on that change of technology, change of demand, we are not going to have the talent. But if you look at our own experience, whether it is TCS or all the other companies represented here, 95% of most of the capacity that has been required for the new services has been built in-house. So we need to, we are sitting on two big factors. One is from a demographic perspective. We have a very young, very trainable workforce coming in, and that's a big plus that we have. Second is, as a society, we respect learning, and therefore people have aspiration and hard work, and they are very, very amenable to learning. So if you make the tools available, and these technologies are mostly fairly easy to learn. It is just that there is heterogeneity. So you've got to make the right tools available. But both from a culture, social, and demographic perspective, I think we are well poised on the talent side.
So you don't, this is not one of the top challenges that you foresee either for yourselves or for the industry?
No, in fact, it's one of the biggest benefits that we have.
Okay.
Compared
Salin?
to.
So building on what Rajesh has shared and Rishad, I think for us, learning is really this always-on learning concept, where the onus comes on us to reskill ourselves continuously, because the opportunity is there if we can find the reskilling. We have various infrastructure tools, an app on our cell phone for all our employees, which now we are helping to spread outside with anyone who wants to leverage it. You know, over 900 different modules of training. So there's a lot of that going on. And the key really is making it possible for employees and broadly anyone in the sector to start to do the reskilling. And what we see is, for example, by enabling this, we see our employees doing 35 minutes of training each week on their own time, 60 minutes of training on the weekend. So there's a lot of this reskilling, you know, some gamification for that, and then allowing them onto the project. So it's a lot of work that's going on in this area.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about technology and where you see the technology shifts now for the future. You know, we've heard Chandra and Praveen, Debjani all talk about AI, talk about the smart economy and so on and so forth. Rajesh, let me start by asking you, you know, what do you believe will be the next shift as far as technology is concerned? We talked about IP, innovation, experience. That's, you know, that's been a big theme that the three of you are building on within your companies as well. What do you see?
The biggest shift in technology is going to come from creating new. So bulk of what technology has done so far has been to digitize workflows that existed in the physical world. So we have digitized it, we have increased efficiency, we have unleashed it. But now technology is shifting to relook at how the industries are organized themselves. We have typically organized industries from an inside-out perspective. What are the products that we do? What are the services that we do? The opportunity that technology is going to do is to actually look at industry structure from an outside-in view. What is it that we do for the customer? There is a value chain of multiple industries that comes together. So if the customer wants wellness, who all are the people involved in it? It's not about the hospital, it's not about pharma, it's not about insurance. Wellness is the purpose. If somebody wants fashion, what is retail going to do? What is the product company going to do? Whether it is wealth. So you're seeing industry structures being redefined from a product-centric view to a purpose-centric view. And technology is at the heart of actually changing the boundaries between how industries are organized. And we're going to take a dramatically different view of how
So
end
what does
users.
that mean then in terms of organizational rewiring? If you're saying you're moving away from a product-centric to a purpose-centric approach, what does it mean then from an
It's a
organizational
huge,
rewiring perspective?
Companies like us who are actually servicing horizontally across multiple industries are in a very unique situation to lead how this transformation happens. So in many places, we are the common denominator, and that's why you see an increasing number of CEOs nowadays coming and visiting us. They're very interested in knowing what are you guys doing, not with their own competitors, but with their adjacencies. They want to see how they can leverage us as this common innovation platform, which can put together the new industry structures. So we see this, the sheer number of CEOs and board members who are visiting and just trying to figure out what's going on is just amazing. And I think we're in a very unique position because we are a common glue, and they have a trusted relationship with us, and we have the talent base. So we are the place where innovation can happen rapidly and at an affordable basis so that
And
it
at
can
scale.
be, and at scale, so that you can reiterate again and again. Because at the heart of innovation is this need to be continuously able to reiterate. And that requires scale, that requires access, it requires trust, and it requires a cost point that makes it affordable. And we have all of that.
Rishad?
No, I very much agree with Rajesh. I think, for large organizations have historically been very enterprise-centric in the way they serve their customers as opposed to being very customer-centric. And it's a fundamental change. And the simplest example is if I'm a bank, have I really thought about an account opening process without somebody walking into a branch or dealing with a teller, right? Have I really thought about a digital account? Have I thought about an account that means not having a formal account, but having a prepaid card, as an example, right? So it's a profound change for most enterprises in most industries to move from being enterprise-centric to being very human-centric, very customer-centric, the customer at the center of it all. And I think how do you help customers in that journey of reimagination, re-architecting, re-engineering their process, which to me is this whole strategic design capability is going to become very, very important. And for many of us as companies who played significantly downstream, playing upstream to be able to play end-to-end is going to become very relevant, right? So building strategic design capabilities, Salil alluded to that earlier in terms of some of the M&As that he's done, I think is going to become very, very critical. I think the other thing that is going to be important for the future is how do we leverage ecosystems that sit outside of the company as well? How do we leverage capability working with academia? How do we work with young companies and startups? And how do we leverage
Each other?
leverage them?
Not part of
I'm not
the
sure if we've
ecosystem?
gotten there yet. But how do we work with young startups? How do we work with expert networks? How do we work with consultants? How do we work with crowdsourcing platforms? How do we leverage talent that's sitting everywhere, and how do we bring it to the table together? And the challenge with these different pieces of external ecosystems are going to be how do you bring it together impactfully to a customer? But I think you're going to have to learn to leverage what's happening outside to create impact for your customers as well.
Salil?
I think the very relevant points, the point you made about how do you structure to deal with this is critical because in a way, if you're organized as was being described to cater to multiple industries through similar sets of individuals or capabilities, you create tremendous benefit because indeed there's a lot of interest now which is showing up, which is how do I leverage technology across? And the starting discussion with the CEO is, can you help us transform our company? Now, this was normally a discussion which was happening
So when
maybe
you
with
say,
a few
so
consulting
for
guys.
For the benefit of everybody, let's break this down. When a customer tells you or told you, I want you to digitize my company, to now saying, I want you to transform my company, what levers is he expecting you to exercise today from digitization versus transformation?
It's what Rajesh was sharing earlier. We had let's say 5 years ago, if you made things more efficient in a process,
You were
then
done.
applied technology, for the most part, you would address the issue. Today, you're almost rethinking how things are going to happen. You take a business, a bank, you take a retail company, take a utility, take an insurance company. You look at how they're redoing business because they're getting disrupted by these tech-native companies. And that tech-native company is thinking without any boundaries.
Yeah.
And they're coming to us to say, look, can you help us think of the transformation? Because being in that legacy business, they've not thought of it.
Yeah.
Fortunately for us, being in the tech business, we see all of it. So we are able to fulfill that need.
You know, you talked about digitally native companies, and there's been a lot of focus on startups and how and that ecosystem, Rishad. But you know, within the three of your organizations, and I want to discuss this from a leadership perspective as well. You know, they say that if you're not thinking like a startup, you're probably staring at a shutdown. So how do you continue to operate within large organizations with a startup culture?
So it's not easy, first of all. Look, I think you have to have a strong mindset of learnability, and equally important, the ability to unlearn. Right? Because oftentimes people who've been in jobs for many years, been very successful at those jobs, have a certain fixed way of doing things. So unlearning, as well as being able to learn, I think is going to be very, very critical as you move forward.
Bringing in outside perspective. I mean, for instance, you're looking now to bring in a CEO from the outside. Does that help as well?
No, it certainly helps in terms of bringing, you know, the reasons for that is not this particular
I'm just
thing.
asking. I'm just asking. What is the reason?
Well, we can, we're on live television, Shireen, right? As you told me earlier. No, so look, I think learnability, I think so that's very, very important. Okay. And so certainly when I look at people and interview people, I'm looking for that skill. I'm certainly looking for teamwork and the ability to work. I'll talk about other soft things which I think are very, very important in leadership. I think a certain sense of empathy and vulnerability. You know, gone are the days of everybody having all the right answers. The world is changing so quickly. The technology industry is changing so quickly. So the ability to put people together, the ability to leverage what's outside of you and to bring it together.
I'm glad that you brought this up. The two of you get time to think about it. I'm going to start with Rishad, so he has the toughest job. You talked about empathy and vulnerability, and you talked about not having all the right answers. Give me an anecdote of what you thought would have been the best decision, but it turned out to be not so great.
No, I can give you, I mean, there are plenty of examples. I'll give you an example, we've tried a bunch of different things, and they're so specific to Wipro, so it doesn't make sense. But, we tried a certain planning approach where we wanted to have a base and we wanted to have an ambition target, right? And it created a very different and distorted kind of behavior than what we were anticipating to get. So we said, hey, look, we made a mistake and we're going to change course. So we're not afraid to say, hey, look, we tried something, it didn't work. We tried 100% variable pay plans initially for a while. That didn't work. So we're willing to, these are very small examples, but I think there's a mindset to try.
Yeah.
And then move on if it doesn't work and not get dog-headed about the fact that you tried something.
So that was the point that I was making. How do you institutionalize a culture that doesn't discourage failure, encourages being able to take a risk?
By sharing failure. By sharing failure as leadership, by talking about your own areas where you've things have not worked out as planned, and encouraging your teams by sharing your own stories and having their back.
Okay.
I mean, there's no aha answer in my mind.
Yeah, maybe not. Rajesh?
Pass.
Well, you can't pass. No question of passing. Not that easy. Not that easy. You have to give us one story. Come on. What? No story?
He's a much better storyteller.
No. You have to give us one story. I'll get to Salil. Okay, Salil, you start and I'll give Rajesh. We'll end with him then.
I think the view on with empathy and vulnerability, I think there are critical elements, no doubt. I was just going to add one other one, which is being a bit paranoid. To me, that really helps to think about where the change is coming from. There are ways of encouraging what you were describing, which is, let's say, internal risk-taking, and to make sure that there are no sort of ways you're penalizing massively these risk-taking activities, because that kills it, or understanding what is making the impact. For example, as you look at our business or any business, some sectors are growing faster, some are slower. It doesn't start to say that those sectors which are growing slower have some huge inherent problem. There could be some externalities which are creating that. So being a bit more understanding in that sense, building empathy to understand how that is happening, look to that. But to me, this point about being paranoid about where the change is coming from, because there's so much change in our sector.
What are you most paranoid about today? What change are you most paranoid about today as a leader?
No, the change is, are we keeping pace with the technology change? Because while the opportunities are phenomenal, if we remain static and don't change, then we are stuck with really all the old things which our clients are no longer looking at. So my paranoia is more stemming from how relevant do we remain with the change in technology.
Okay, story, anecdote?
Anecdote for?
For a decision that went wrong when you when you thought that it would go right?
No, fortunately, they've all gone right, so this.
Rajesh, come on, you've got to give us one. You've got to give us one.
I think, but from a culture of risk-taking, I think TCS epitomizes it. So whenever we have to start something new, we typically we never go out looking for who has done it before. We look inside and say that who among us is most likely to be able to do it. And then the organization comes behind and supports. And many times that person is learning on the job and doing well. And because this is done at all levels of the organization, even at the senior most levels we do it. So there is a whole level of comfort and confidence that builds up inside. So the approach is that the first right of leadership belongs internally. And we fully recognize the fact that we don't know the answers to it, I think. And that is what Rishad said, that how do you demonstrate that culture inside? I think that's a very important part of what makes TCS.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Empathy and empathy along with leadership that is sort of nurturing is critical. But since the three of you talked about data and we've been talking about the digital transformation as well, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to throw this open to questions now. So if you do have them, please raise your hands. I'll come across to you. But Rishad, let me start by asking you, the conversation globally today is around harmonization of rules when it comes to the use of data, facial recognition, AI, and so on and so forth. There's also the possibility of a digital tax, and we're still awaiting the OECD to come up with its guidelines on what that would mean. So there is a lot that could perhaps act as a disruptor in the near future. How do you see these, and what do you believe could be the next wave of disruption or the next disruptors?
Sheen, I'm not an expert on this.
Sure.
I don't want to sort of pontificate, but I'm not an expert. I don't know too much, but I would say you have to begin with the philosophy that who the data is owned by. And if you start with that premise and then work from there, I think that allows you to think quite logically about this. I know the government has just passed a bill in terms of what our data protection philosophy is.
Yeah, not passed it yet. It's
it's going to a parliamentary committee and they're going to have a discussion. But I think they share some thoughts. I think they're on the right lines. They're sort of thinking more practically about the issue, how data can be leveraged smartly. So I think you're going to find the right balance between using it wisely and yet not harnessing its potential. I think you've got to strike the right balance between them.
Rajesh?
I think this idea that data is a community asset and will need to be governed by communities and governments, I think that's something that we can't get away from. Because we didn't fully understand what data it became a corporate asset, but it will have to be a community asset with the right of use being what is done rather than the ownership of data. Ownership will have to be community, right of asset. And when you think about that structure, we have got enough experience in the past, whether it is areas like oil or whether it is areas like spectrum, where it has been seen as a community asset, which is licensed rather than secured privately.
Salil?
So the view on data today, as you said, is evolving. It's still not settled, even globally. Of course, we are looking at here. But the opportunity there is what people are looking at, which is the massive play on insight with data. There'll be a lot of care because, the issues around privacy are quite critical.
Yes.
And at least globally in India, there's a lot of thought being put into it. My sense is as an industry or as companies represented here, there's a lot of deep understanding that we have of how to use it. Already structures have been built, for example, within our business, our company, which look at how to maintain that privacy for data. So we don't see that that's going to change or create any roadblocks, but the rules are still being developed.
Absolutely.
So we'll have to adapt to it as we go along.
We will have to adapt to those. Questions for the panel here, if you could raise your hands, we'll get across to you, and we need to wind up as well, so I'll take just one or two. Yes, sir, go ahead. If you can stand up, I don't know if there's a microphone somewhere close by. Yes, there is one. Yeah, go ahead. Please keep it short.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. So this is about captive setup. While the organizations look forward, you as a denominator, to suggest a common platform for innovation. But there is also an increasing trend of captive setup, where the organizations, they say, okay, I'll preferably buy all my cloud natives from AWS or GCP and set up my own services team back in India. So how does that pose challenge to
Okay.
the service integrators or the service organizations.
Captive setups and what challenge that throws up, Rajesh?
I think it's about location of talent, as I said. Just given the sheer size of the talent pool available here and the future outlook of it, it's likely that more and more work will come to where the talent is. It's a competitive environment. People will organize it in different ways. I see it as a trend that de-risks this need to move people to where the work is, when the work comes to where the talent is. If you are better managers of the talent, if you are better at investing, we will be better at servicing that customers need. And I always believe that anybody who runs it as a business is in a better position to do it than somebody who runs it as a cost center. And for us, this is the business that we are in. So we are constantly investing in it and transforming in it rather than looking at it as a cost center.
Unfortunately, I'm getting signal that we're out of time. So my apologies to each one of you who raised your hands here for questions. We're out of time. Just a month ago, and I'll close with that, Rajesh said, we aspire to be a $100 billion company. And I said that there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't or you can't. So Rajesh, I'll start by asking you, where do you see the industry in the next few years?
Well, if India is going to be a $5 trillion economy, I do believe that 1.5 trillion belongs to us. So that's where we're going to be.
Salil.
Yeah, I'll only echo it as I've stated. I think the tech trend is phenomenal. We have all the right talent and a real determination to make it. So without a doubt, we can be a massive industry.
Rishad. I agree. That's plain and simple, I agree. Ladies and gentlemen, as they say, the greatest danger in turbulent times is not turbulence, but acting with old logic. And I think what you've gotten a glimpse of here from the three gentlemen is how they're reimagining their businesses. Their business will be done in the next few years, the opportunities, the challenges, and the risks that they foresee, and how they're building moats around their organizations and the industry to be able to capitalize on them. Thank you very much, Rishad Premji, Rajesh Gopinathan, and Salil Parekh. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Shireen. I'm going to ask you all to pose for a photograph. And Shireen, there are thank you mementos coming your way for you to hand over to the panelists. I think when Shireen said the ultimate battlefield is going to unfold, what she didn't realize, she had the epitome of diplomacy on stage in these three gentlemen. So